8 people were murdered, and shortly afterward, he got a tattoo with an 8-ball and a skull on it. But he's saying he's not responsible for their murders. Let's talk about the Wagner case and what we're learning in the murder of Ashley Bush and her unborn child. Everybody, and welcome to Profiling Evil podcast this week in our crime recap. I don't think you could make this stuff up, and you're going to be frustrated and shocked by some of the news that's coming out in the true crime community this week. Some of it we've already addressed, and I'm going to move on to other kinds of things, but primarily we're going to talk about 3 murder cases. As we get started, I hope you'll take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button, and ring the bell so you're getting all of our notifications. Now let's start it with Ashley Bush. Well, hey folks, if you haven't had the chance to review my previous video on the Ashley Bush abduction and murder, go back and watch that. This is where the mother was abducted in Arkansas and murdered in Missouri. So make sure you go back and watch that. Now, the timeline is really interesting, and I go into some detail about things like cell phone triangulation. In fact, if you look at this image I'm putting up on the screen, you can see that triangulation really can help law enforcement understand where an individual is traveling while using a phone. In Ashley's case, it wasn't very helpful, except it did help them identify the location where her phone quit working. Now, what's more informational on this case, folks, is about the woman who lured Ashley with a fake job interview. We're also going to learn how her husband played a role in trying to dispose of her body and go along with his wife's alleged killing plot. In that alleged plot, 42-year-old suspect Amber Waterman created a fake Facebook account on October 25th using the name of Lucy Barrows. She used the fake account to lure Ashley Bush to meet her with an offering of work and much-needed supplies for her upcoming pregnancy. Well, now we're learning that the predator's plan included abducting Ashley at gunpoint and later executing her. Either seconds before or moments after, she cut the unborn baby from her body. This baby may have survived for a short time. We just don't know yet. And more information is going to come out on this, but for now, I want to pause for a second and listen to what the coroner on the case had to say about the bizarre circumstances that deputies and he faced in this baby's death investigation. And keep in mind, all the while, they were unaware that the child's mother had been murdered, wrapped in a tarp, and burned. Then dumped in that final location where her body was discovered by police.
The McDonald County coroner says 33-year-old Ashley Bush's baby was cut out of her body Monday night, the same day she went missing in Benton County.
My whole adult life has been centered around death.
Coroner William Goodwin is the coroner for McDonald County in Missouri, about 30 miles from Benton County.
But never seen so much wickedness and evil. And that's the only way to describe it.
Goodwin was first called on Monday to a report of a stillborn baby at a Longview, Missouri convenience store.
She did have the placenta in her pants and handed it over and along with the baby to the paramedics. She wanted to transport, they were insistent that
He says on Monday, after kidnapping and allegedly killing the pregnant mother from Benton County, Amber Waterman pretended she was in labor, calling 911. Amber and her husband, Jamie Waterman, met EMTs at a local convenience store in McDonald County. EMTs were unable to save the baby's life. The baby was taken to a local funeral home, but as for Amber?
Refused all medical treatment. She did not want paramedics to examine her.
Coroner Goodwin said the very next day, the couple came to a local funeral home, which Coroner Goodwin owns. The couple spoke to him about cremating the baby and scheduled a funeral, even having a name picked out.
The baby was perfect. Beautiful little girl.
The arrest record says on Wednesday, Amber admitted to her husband, Jamie, that she killed Bush. The couple then allegedly burned her dead body and moved it off the property. According to Coroner Goodwin, that's the same day they had a funeral for the baby.
6 or 8. Yeah. And Amber's mother was with her, and she was completely in the dark. She didn't know. She kept asking why, there was going to be an autopsy and things like that. She couldn't understand why.
Goodwin says they moved Ashley's body, cleaned themselves up, and showed up at the funeral home that same afternoon for the service.
I was first notified Wednesday morning by the Benton County coroner, Daniel Oxford, that there might be something to this, some things pertaining to this child, and was wanting to take custody of the infant to do an autopsy.
It's after the funeral when Coroner Goodwin started to realize this may not be what it seems. After the service, the Benton County coroner was there to meet with the couple. Coroner Goodwin told them he was there to take custody of the baby in order to do an autopsy.
So nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She wanted to know why they were doing an autopsy.
For Goodwin, he says her reaction was a red flag.
But then the tears kind of dried up, and her next question was, will there be DNA testing? And Daniel and I both looked at one another, and we knew that we had her at this point, that there was something definitely wrong.
The McDonald County coroner says Ashley's body will be sent for an autopsy in Springfield, Missouri on Monday morning. Rachel Williams, 5 News.
Well, now Waterman and her husband have been remanded to a federal court where she's facing murder charges and he faces accessory charges in that fatal abduction. I'm still having a hard time getting over the staging of their meeting with the ambulance and the deputies. If you remember that, she said, I had an early birth, went into labor, and she had deputies and an ambulance meet her. Well, there she was carrying the deceased child, and she was even walking around with Ashley's evidence of birth tissue inside of her own jeans. I mean, what leads a human being to think that this is something that makes sense? Well, it almost worked. The coroner actually responded to the deputy's requests of a stillbirth and released the baby to a local funeral home instead of going to the medical examiner's office for examination. Now, that's not that far out of the norm, but the more investigators learned, the more disturbed they became, and they led the coroner back to the funeral home where he found the Watermans planning a cremation for the child. He asked for DNA from the parents and the baby, and he knew he was onto something as Jamie Waterman, the husband, took off running, leaving Ashley, the alleged killer, to fend for herself. Well, he would later tell investigators that his wife made up the entire story, but he only learned about it after the fact. He admitted to helping burn Ashley's body and then hauling the remains off to a disposal site. These things are crazy, and this is really the perfect time for me to remind you of a service that I've been using for the past 2 years called Truth Finder. And here's why it's important. It gives you a chance to look into the backgrounds of people. Let's watch. Hey everybody, it's Mike from Profiling Evil. I've been studying criminal behavior for more than 40 years, and one of my favorite research tools is Truth Finder. It's online, and you're not going to believe the information stored there. So if you want to know more about that new neighbor, your babysitter, or your next online date, give Truth Finder a try. I'm including a link below with special discount pricing. You got to click the link to get it, and then enter EVIL10 at checkout. We're an affiliate, which means we get a small commission, enough to buy a small Diet Dr. Pepper, but you can cancel at any time. Thanks for listening today. Well, now let's move over to the big news coming out of the Delphi case this week, and it has to do with reality. The man who's been arrested in connection with the Delphi murder case asked for a public defender. That's right, folks. If you remember, he demanded time from the court when he was first charged in order to get an attorney. But then reality set in. You see, once Richard Allen reached out to attorneys, he learned that a defense team costs a ton of money. In response to the reality, he wrote a presiding judge and said, "Hey, I gotta ask the court for an appointed attorney," stating he had, quote, "no clue how expensive it would be to just talk to somebody." Well, Allen went on to lament how getting arrested had impacted him financially and told the court that his wife had also had to quit her job for safety reasons. This, he says, is why he needed help. Well, this shows how he, if he's convicted of these crimes, had many other victims, including his family, who were left behind to pick up the pieces of their lives once he was arrested. Well, what are your thoughts about this when you read the letter? Is this thing all about him? Is it all about his family? You know, he concluded his comments by saying he was throwing himself at the mercy of the court, asking the court to provide whatever assistance they could. Mm-hmm. Well, I believe the state will provide him with a public defender, and those same taxpayer funds that pay for that defender are also going to pay for investigators, testing, and many other things, especially if this thing ends up being a death penalty case. And while all this is happening, someone who's been tied to the case is having criminal charges against him dropped. But don't get too upset. We're talking about Keegan Kline. And this guy still faces dozens of charges. But I want you to listen to this story by WishTV.com.
Miami County judge has approved a request to drop some of the child porn charges against Keegan Kline.
He is the man that police say collected sexual videos and images of underage girls using the Anthony Schatz social media profile, a profile that is connected to the Delphi murders. Prosecutors asked last week to drop 5 counts, saying that the charges could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. Kline still faces 25 other charges related to child pornography, and his trial is set to begin in January. We will certainly be covering that right up to and through.
Well, as we wrap up this section, Judge, addressed to the Carroll Circuit Court, said the following: "In the cause listed above, I, Richard M. Allen, hereby throw myself at the mercy of the court. I'm begging to be provided with legal assistance in a public defender or whatever help is available. At my initial hearing," he wrote, "I asked to find representation for myself. However, at the time, I had no clue how expensive it would be to just talk to someone. I also didn't realize what my wife and immediate financial situation was going to be. We have both been forced to immediately abandon employment." Well, that's an understatement. He's been forced to abandon employment, absolutely, because he's in jail. Now, his wife, he says, me due to incarceration, and my wife for her personal safety. And this is a tragedy if she's being threatened in the community for something her husband did. And I've seen this kind of behavior online with people saying she had to know. Well, I'll tell you what, I've handled a lot of homicide cases, and I've talked to a lot of serial killers. Their families didn't know. Well, he continues on and says, "She had to abandon our house for her own safety, and what little reserve there is, it will fail to even maintain the original residence. Again, I throw myself at the mercy of the court. Please provide me whatever assistance you may. Thank you for your time in this most urgent matter. Sincerely, Richard M. Allen." What are your thoughts on this one, folks? Now, let's talk about the Wagner murder trial that's underway. George Wagner is facing the final days in his murder trial. It's a trial that's now entering its 41st day. I appeared on Court TV this morning as the defense team slipped in 3 witnesses. Now, this was a surprise move by the defense, who convinced the court that those witnesses needed to be heard now because of challenges in schedule that they had. So the prosecution, who's still presenting their case, graciously gave the defense time to get their witnesses in. 2 of the witnesses were pastors who talked about the Wagners during the time that he lived in Alaska after those murders occurred. They also put on a tattoo artist who testified that he was responsible for coming up with the idea of putting an 8-ball and skull tattoo on Wagner. The tattoo artist testified it wasn't Wagner's idea, it was his. Well, I don't know. What do you think about that? I mean, I find myself wondering why he thought of an 8-ball and a skull as a tattoo, if he really did do that. And I find myself wondering how close the tattoo artist is to Wagner. I mean, what are your thoughts, folks? Is this just a weird coincidence that 8-ball and skull were put on as a tattoo when there happened to be 8 victims in this murder case? A murder that happened to people he was close to? Let's listen to this report.
Yeah, Mike, 3 witnesses who testified on behalf of murder suspect George Wagner live in Alaska, and to accommodate their travel needs, prosecutors agreed to let the defense case begin today, even though the state has more evidence to present. The character of an accused killer quickly came into play when the 9th week of George Wagner's murder trial began.
Both Jake and George would help serve at the mission.
Kelly Cinereski is a pastor in Alaska, which is where George Wagner and his family moved after investigators say they executed a plan to kill 8 members of the Rhoden family in 2016. Cinereski got to know the family years before the murders.
They were a close family. They worked together.
His son, Caleb, is also a pastor. Caleb testified the Wagners attended the church he operates in Alaska a year after the Pike County massacre took place. Caleb recalled a conversation he had with George's brother, Jake, about victim Hannah Rhoden.
He let me know then that Hannah had passed away, and then told me the whole story of how 8 members of the Rhoden family had been killed. So.
He certainly didn't confess to you, did he?
No, he did not.
George Wagner's attorneys have emphasized Jake's admitted involvement in the murders in an effort to shield their client. Also today, the defense called a tattoo artist to the stand who created this image on George Wagner's arm. It shows a skull and an 8-ball. The artist said the design was not George's idea, but his own. After defense attorneys called their final witness of the day, prosecutors resumed their case by showing this recreation of a false truck bed. Jake Wagner said he and George built the false bed to conceal their presence at the first crime scene. The lead investigator in the case testified 2 Ohio BCI agents, both bigger than George Wagner, had no trouble entering and exiting the back of the pickup truck during the recreation. Now let's go back for a second to the defense witnesses who testified today. One man, a trucking garage foreman, flew here into southern Ohio from a city south of Anchorage, Alaska. He supervised George and Jake when they worked at that garage a year or so after the homicides. He said George was a reliably hard worker while Jake was too distracted by a Facebook page detailing the massacre. Reporting live tonight in Waverly, Todd Dykes, WLWT News 5.
Then the defense put on a retired crime scene investigator and a former law enforcement officer who suggested that he believed whoever killed those victims, the victims that Wagner's accused of killing, acted alone. Well, Court TV's Ted Rowland asked me about this in the state's case and some of the challenges that investigators face in these kinds of cases. During my response, the audio kind of starts to fade off, but I think you can catch most of that interview. Now, the most important thing I brought up is that this was a family affair, that this family did this together. And I even used their own words that the Wagners stick together. Let's watch this.
Is this enough to get a beyond a reasonable doubt standard and convict George Wagner? Yes, it's been months, 40 days of testimony plus, but is there enough there in your opinion?
Good morning, Ted. I can't say that there is enough there. I mean, I still think that the state has some more proof that they need to put forth, and they're coming to the close of their case, but just because they may have placed him at the scene does not mean that he actually pulled a trigger. They're saying he didn't, and it does not mean that he was actually an accomplice to this necessarily. So certainly it does advance the ball in terms of tying Mr. Wagner to the actual crimes, but is it enough to get beyond the reasonable doubt standard? That still remains to be seen, and it will be interesting to see how the defense puts on their case.
Mike, part of the problem in this case for the state is it's so complicated. You have multiple crime scenes, multiple victims, and getting this across, and multiple defendants, really. I mean, George is the only one in this trial, but the Wagner family was all working together, according to the state. What are your thoughts in terms of how the state's been able to wrangle this, and talk, if you will, about the difficulties that law enforcement and now prosecutors have because of the complexity?
Yeah, I have to agree with Michelle from a legal perspective that these are introducing some interesting challenges that I think are going to be kind of hard to overcome. But if we kind of shift and look at the emotional impact of this thing, I think the state is getting where they need to be. I think, number one, it's really important to recognize that I think the state's done a good job of saying, listen, the Wagners stick together. They planned this thing. They went out, they were preparing for this thing. They bought items that would help them to avoid being charged with this crime, something that would separate them from evidence that might be recovered, like footprints or shoe prints and other kinds of pieces of evidence. But the bottom line is they organized this thing, they stuck together, they executed it together. They were involved in this thing. And of course, when you start seeing family members who are showing their love one for another by saying, listen, I'll go to prison for the rest of my life, but just spare my family of the death penalty. They're also implicated. Everybody was involved. Everybody knew that there were going to be homicides that occurred. And when you ask Ted the question about putting a case like this together and presenting it in a way that makes sense, that is the challenge. How do you keep from building the clock, just letting the jury understand?
We're losing your audio a little bit there.
Well, what became clear in this witness's testimony was that the defense team wanted the jury to hear the expert's opinion that there was probably only one shooter in the murder. This is outrageous. Remember, even the same witness testified that the victims were shot with a rifle and a pistol. Listen to my response on this.
Basically, what we're creating is what's called a pattern transfer.
We now know why this witness is on the stand for the defense, Jonathan Priest, opining that basically thinks there only one person was at least crime scene one, and they're going to go through all the different crime scenes, and that one person would have to be Jake, right? That makes sense. Michelle Thomas and Mike King still with us. Mike, your thoughts on this witness and how it might move the ball for the defense?
I think he's a credible witness. The thing I guess I'm having trouble with is that he openly admits, I cannot say for sure there was only one person in there. And we got multiple crime scenes. It might make sense that people spread through different places, but we don't know what happened before those executions occurred. And could there have been more people in the room or standing back, and then one person had to be the one to drag the bodies or create those transfers that they're so concerned about? I guess the other thing I keep thinking about, is something that's not being said, is there's indication that two firearms were used in this particular portion of this homicide series, one a rifle and one a .40 caliber. Are they suggesting that one person's shooting both guns and somehow dragging this person? I mean, I'm having a hard time putting this together, Ted, thinking there's got to be more than one. Well, what are your thoughts on these cases, folks? Especially in regard to the Wagner case. Do you think it's possible that one person killed everyone in that family, and that person was somebody other than George Wagner who's standing in front of a trial today? I'm going to be looking for your comments down below, and I hope that you'll take time to enter your thoughts on each of the cases that we've discussed today. Make sure you're responding to each other. I think it's a lot of fun to watch and listen to you as you collaborate back and forth. And as a reminder, with the holidays rapidly approaching, I hope you'll consider some of our merchandise. You can find it on profilingevil.com. And please, folks, make sure you're considering purchasing some of my books for family members. They make great gifts. I hope that your holidays are fun, that they're safe, and that you're surrounded by love. And now, thanks for all your support of Profiling Evil. And to those of you who are in a position to support our channel through memberships, thanks so much. I don't know if you folks realize it, but you can join channel memberships for as little as $1.99 a month, and it really does help us roll out quality content. Keep in mind, folks, the Profiling Evil team isn't using this money for salaries or personal compensation. We use it to pay the bills here at Profiling Evil, and it costs money to put things on YouTube. We're lucky enough to also be able to give sizable donations to train police officers in how to investigate crimes against people. In addition, we are so proud that we continue to support the Children's Justice Center, a place where children can be forensically examined, they can be prepared for court, and they can receive psychological counseling to help them process the traumas that they endure and hopefully prepare for a productive life after this is over. It's an honor to do this, and it just wouldn't be possible without your help. So please, folks, make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button and checking out Profiling Evil podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you all soon at the next crime scene.